The sun dipped low over Ouagadougou, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Outside the schoolyard, Ibrahim stood quietly watching Amadou chase his friends, his laughter ringing clear. Beside him, the widow wiped her eyes, no longer a beggar, but a mother with dignity restored. As the evening breeze lifted the flag above the school, Ibrahim's voice was steady, almost like a vow. Compassion is not weakness. It is the true strength of a nation. The crowd that had gathered clapped softly, their hearts full. For them, this was more than one story. It was proof that kindness could still change lives. The crowd hushed. Whispers spread quickly the president had stopped. Some people sneered, others gasped. Phones lifted cameras recording the scene. Ibrahim's chest tightened. He saw not just a widow, but a symbol, a soldier's family abandoned, a mother fighting for her child, a nation's failure written in human pain. He stepped closer, lowering himself so his eyes met hers. "What is your name?" he asked gently. Her eyes widened. For years she had been invisible. No one had asked her name. With trembling lips, she whispered it. He nodded slowly, then looked at the child, his thin frame shivering in the heat. Ibrahim's voice grew firm, carrying across the silent crowd. "This woman will not beg at the gates of her own nation. Not while I stand here." Gasps erupted. Some clapped softly, others simply stared. The widow wept, her body shaking, as the president extended his hand. And in that single moment, the story of despair began to shift toward hope. Before we continue with this heartbreaking story, I'd love to know, where are you watching this video from, and what time is it there? Comment below. I can't wait to read your answers. The widow's hand shook as she tried to wipe the dust from her boy's face. Ibrahim watched her closely, his eyes soft but steady. He motioned for the guards to step back. The crowd leaned in, hungry for every word. "Tell me," Ibrahim said gently, "what brought you here?" Her lips trembled. For a long moment she could not speak. Then, with a deep breath, the words spilled out, broken and raw. "My husband. He was a soldier. He gave his life on the border. They said he died a hero, but when he was gone, the world turned its back on me." The boy coughed again, his body frail. She held him tighter. "They took his uniform, his badge, even the papers that proved his service. His family rejected me, said I was a burden. I tried to sell vegetables, but the stall was taken. I tried to clean houses, but no one wanted a widow. Day after day, I begged in the market. Some gave me scraps, others gave me insults." Her voice cracked and her eyes filled with tears. One night she whispered, I slept under the bridge with my son. He cried for food, but there was nothing. I thought, maybe it would be better if we didn't wake up." The crowd fell silent. Even those who had mocked her earlier looked away in shame. Her body shook as she continued. "Yesterday, he fainted from hunger. I carried him to the clinic. They asked for money I didn't have. I begged them to help. The doctor said, no insurance, no treatment. He turned us away. My son could have died in my arms." Her words were knives cutting into the conscience of everyone listening. Ibrahim's jaw tightened. His voice was low but heavy with pain. "Your husband died for this land, and now you must beg at its gates. This is not justice. This is betrayal." The widow's tears streamed freely. "Excellency," she whispered, "I don't need much. Just let my boy live." The little boy stirred, his small voice barely a whisper. "Mama, I'm hungry." The sound tore through Ibrahim like a blade. His own memories rose. Memories of his childhood, of nights when he too had gone to bed hungry, of neighbors who had shared bread with him when his family had nothing. He remembered the hands that lifted him when he was weak, the voices that told him to keep going. Now standing before this woman, he felt the weight of that past pressing against the present. He crouched lower eye to eye with the child. "What is your name, little one?" The boy coughed, then answered softly, "Amadou." Ibrahim placed a hand on his thin shoulder. His voice grew firm, echoing against the palace walls. "Amadou will not be left to die. His father's sacrifice will not be forgotten. Not while I have breath in my body." The widow covered her mouth, sobbing. She had expected rejection, maybe pity, but not this, never this. Ibrahim straightened, turning to the stunned crowd. "Remember her words," he declared. "A soldier gave his life, and his widow begs at our gates. Is this who we are? Is this the nation we claim to build?" No one answered. Some lowered their heads. Others blinked back tears. Ibrahim turned back to the widow, his voice gentle once more. "You are not alone anymore. Not today. Not ever again." For the first time in years, the widow's eyes carried something fragile, yet powerful. Hope. And in that moment, the pain she revealed had become a mirror for a nation, for its people, and for its leader. The silence hung heavy after her words. Dust drifted in the hot air, and the boy's weak cough echoed like thunder in the hearts of those watching. Ibrahim's eyes burned with a mix of sorrow and fire. He had heard enough. "Open the gates," he ordered. The guards froze. This was against every protocol. No one entered the palace grounds without clearance, and certainly not a beggar from the street. One guard stepped forward hesitantly. "Excellency, with respect, we cannot." Ibrahim's voice cut sharp as steel. "If she cannot enter, then neither will I." Gasps spread through the crowd. Phones lifted higher. The president of the nation was defying his own rules for a widow and her child. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, then obeyed. The massive iron gates groaned open. Ibrahim bent down gently, lifting Amadou into his arms. The boy's head rested against his chest, too weak to resist. The widow gasped, covering her face. "Excellency, please, you don't have to," but he did. His voice was firm, carrying across the courtyard. A soldier carried the weight of this nation on his shoulders. Today I will carry his son. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some wept openly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The guards tried to keep order as people surged forward, filming, murmuring. "He lifted her child himself," one man whispered. "This has never happened before." As Ibrahim walked toward his car, the widow stumbled to her feet, her legs trembling. She hurried after him, clutching her scarf to her chest. For the first time in years, people stepped aside to let her pass. At the car door, Ibrahim turned to his aide. "Take them inside. Food, water, a doctor at once." The aide nodded and opened the door. But the widow hesitated. She looked at the polished seats, the spotless leather interior. Her body stiffened with shame. "I cannot," she whispered. "I am not fit to sit here." Ibrahim's gaze softened. He reached out, steadying her trembling hand. "You are a mother. That is enough." The crowd erupted in applause. Some clapped, others cheered, some simply cried. In that moment, the widow was no longer invisible. She was seen. Inside the palace courtyard, the convoy rolled forward slowly. People pressed against the gates, recording shouting blessings. News spread like wildfire. The president lifted a widow's child at the gates. In the car, Amadou leaned weakly against Ibrahim, his small fingers still clutching the president's sleeve. The widow sat beside them, her eyes darting around, unsure if this was real. Plates of food were brought, steaming bowls of rice and chicken and bottles of cool water. At first, she refused. Her pride battered, but not broken. Resisted. But Ibrahim urged her. Eat. Your son needs you strong. Tears blurred her vision as she lifted the spoon. The boy ate slowly, each bite cautious, as if the food might vanish. When his belly was finally warm, his eyelids grew heavy. He slept for the first time in days, resting safely in his mother's arms. Ibrahim watched them quietly. His chest was heavy, but not with despair, with resolve. He turned to his aide once more. Prepare the medical team. Tonight they sleep under this roof. Tomorrow, we will do more. The aide nodded, already moving. For Ibrahim, this was not charity. It was justice. And justice, he believed, should begin not in speeches, but in action. Outside the gates, the crowd still lingered, buzzing with disbelief and awe. Some whispered prayers of thanks. Others simply stood in silence, knowing they had witnessed something rare, a leader lowering himself to lift the forgotten. And for one widow and her son, the nightmare of hunger had just begun to turn into a fragile dream of hope. The palace gates closed behind them, but Ibrahim's heart was far from calm. He had seen too many stories like this, a broken system swallowing the weak officials, hiding behind paper and policy. Not this time. The convoy rushed to the city hospital. Sirens cleared the road, people stepping aside as the cars roared past. When they arrived, the widow clutched her son tighter, eyes wide at the towering building. She had been here before, turned away like trash. Doctors and nurses hurried to the entrance when they saw who had arrived. Ibrahim stepped out, still holding Amadou in his arms. His voice was steady, commanding. This child needs treatment. Now. A nurse hesitated, glancing nervously at a clerk behind the reception desk. The man, gray suit, wrinkled glasses perched on his nose, shook his head. Excellency, forgive me, but he has no insurance. The rules are clear. We cannot admit him without payment. The widow gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. It was the same voice, the same rejection she had heard before. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, They said this yesterday. They let him suffer. The crowd of patients and families in the lobby fell silent, watching. All eyes turned to Ibrahim. His chest rose and fell, his voice slow but sharp enough to cut stone. Repeat what you just said. The clerk swallowed hard. Excellency, rules must be followed. We cannot. Ibrahim's fist slammed against the counter. Papers jumped, pens clattered to the floor. Rules. A soldier died defending this nation, and his son is refused medicine because of rules. The air grew thick. No one dared breathe. The widow trembled, clutching her son, waiting for the answer. Ibrahim's eyes blazed. His voice thundered across the hall. A nation that lets the widow of its soldiers beg for scraps, a nation that lets a child die for lack of paper. Such a nation is a disgrace. Some gasped. Others lowered their heads in shame. Nurses wiped at their eyes. He pointed directly at the clerk. Open the pharmacy. Unlock the emergency ward. If anyone stops, you tell them Captain Ibrahim Traoré gave the order. And if they still refuse, his hand struck the desk again. I will tear down every door in this hospital myself. Whispers rippled through the hall. A young doctor stepped forward, tears shining in her eyes. Excellency, my father died waiting for treatment, because we had no insurance. I will not let it happen again. Please allow me. Ibrahim's voice softened. He nodded firmly. Then act. Show this nation what true medicine looks like. The doctor took Amadou gently from his arms. Nurses rushed forward with a stretcher, guiding the widow and her child toward the emergency ward. The boy's thin fingers clung briefly to Ibrahim's sleeve before letting go. As they disappeared down the corridor, Ibrahim turned back to the crowd. His voice carried heavy but clear. This hospital does not belong to money. It belongs to the people. If any official thinks otherwise, they will answer to me. The lobby erupted not with fear, but with applause. Patients clapped, families cried, even some staff bowed their heads. For once, the powerless saw someone speak for them. The clerk who had refused admission shrank behind the counter, face pale. Ibrahim's eyes pinned him with one last warning. Remember this day. Paper does not save lives. Courage does. Later, as Ibrahim stood in the quiet hallway, his aide approached with hesitation. Excellency, you made enemies tonight. There are ministers who profit from these rules. They will not forgive this. Ibrahim's gaze hardened. His voice was low, almost a growl. Then let them come. I was not chosen to protect their profits. I was chosen to protect my people. At that moment, the sound of running footsteps echoed. The young doctor returned, smiling through tears. He's stable. His fever is breaking. He will live. The widow collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief. Ibrahim stepped forward quickly, lifting her back up. Stand, he said softly. You are not begging. You are receiving what you always deserved, justice. The hospital shook with applause once more, and outside, the story spread like fire. The president had defied the system, torn down its cruelty, and demanded humanity. For the widow and her child, it was more than survival. It was the first breath of dignity. The night air inside the hospital was heavy with silence, broken only by the hum of machines and the hurried steps of nurses. In a small room, Amadou lay on a clean white bed. His chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. The fever that had once burned him like fire was beginning to fade. The widow sat beside him, hands trembling as she brushed damp hair from his forehead. For the first time in days, his skin was cool. She whispered his name, her voice soft, almost afraid to believe it. Amadou. He stirred, eyelids fluttering open, his lips parted, a faint whisper escaping. Mama. Water. Her tears came like a flood. She pressed the glass to his lips, watching as he sipped weakly. Then his small hand reached out, clinging to her fingers. He was alive. Truly alive. Behind her, the door opened. Ibrahim entered quietly, his heavy boots softened by the sterile floor. His eyes softened at the sight of the boy. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. He will recover. The doctors say he will be running again within days. The widow covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably. She had begged at the palace gates with nothing but despair. Now, in less than a day, her son had been pulled back from the edge of death. Excellency, she cried through tears. How can I ever repay you? Ibrahim shook his head gently. He reached for her hand, lowering himself until his eyes met hers. You owe me nothing. It is I who owe you. Your husband gave his life for this nation. We failed you. Tonight, we begin to make it right. Her tears fell harder. She lowered her head, unable to find words. At that moment, Amadou stirred again. His voice was hoarse, but steady. Mama. Who is he? The widow brushed his cheek, smiling through tears. He is the man who made sure you lived. Ibrahim's gaze softened. He crouched beside the boy, resting a hand on the bed. And you, Amadou, are the reason I will never stop fighting. You must live not just for yourself, but for the father who gave everything. The boy blinked his eyes wide, then nodded faintly before drifting back into sleep. Outside the room, a crowd had gathered, nurses, patients, even strangers who had heard the story. When Ibrahim stepped out, they began to clap. It started softly, then swelled into a wave of applause. Some wept openly, others bowed their heads. The hospital corridors, usually heavy with grief, now pulsed with hope. A nurse whispered, "He saved the boy." Another added, "No, he saved us all." Ibrahim raised his hand gently, silencing the applause. His voice was calm, but carried weight. This is not about one child or one widow. It is about who we are. If one child is left to die because of poverty, then we all lose our humanity. From this night forward, let it be known, no widow, no orphan, no forgotten soul will be turned away. The crowd erupted again louder, stronger, their claps echoing through every floor. Some shouted his name, others simply cried in gratitude. Back inside, the widow held her son and listened to the sound of voices filling the halls. She whispered into his ear, her tears falling onto his small hands. "You are not forgotten anymore, my son. You are not alone." For years, she had lived in shadows invisible to the world. Now, in one night, light had returned. Hope, fragile but powerful, had been reborn. And for Ibrahim, it was more than a victory. It was a promise that compassion, when turned into action, could bring a nation back to life. That night, long after the hospital lights dimmed, Ibrahim sat in his office, the widow's words still echoing in his mind. "My husband died for this land. Now I beg at its gates." He could not let that sentence die with the evening. It had to change the nation. He summoned his ministers for an emergency meeting. The clock struck midnight as they gathered, some yawning, others uneasy. They had seen the videos spreading like wildfire clips of Ibrahim carrying the child, shouting in the hospital, slamming his fist against the desk. The world was watching. Ibrahim stood at the head of the table, his voice steady but sharp. "Tonight, I carried the son of a fallen soldier into a hospital that had turned him away. This is not an isolated story. This is the story of hundreds, thousands of widows and children abandoned by the very nation their fathers died for. Tell me what kind of leaders allow this." The room fell silent. Ministers shifted in their chairs, eyes lowered. Ibrahim continued, his tone rising. "We cannot build a nation on speeches while its mothers starve. We cannot defend our borders while we abandon the families of the men who died defending them. From this night forward, things will change." He slammed a folder onto the table. Inside were handwritten notes drafted by his own hand during the hours after leaving the hospital. First, a national fund for widows and orphans of soldiers. Every family who lost a father or mother in service will receive monthly support. No child will be left begging. A murmur spread through the room. One minister frowned. "Excellency, the budget." Ibrahim's eyes burned. "The budget of a nation is not meant to fatten politicians while children starve. If we must cut salaries, we will cut ours first." No one dared answer. Second, he continued emergency access to health care. From this day, no hospital may refuse treatment to a widow or orphan. Paperwork will not stand between a dying child and a doctor's hand. The young doctor who had helped Amadou stood quietly at the back of the room, invited as a witness. Tears welled in her eyes as she heard the decree. Third, Ibrahim declared a hotline and a special unit. Any official who denies aid will face investigation. Corruption will not hide behind rules any longer. The room was heavy with silence, but this time it was not shame. It was realization. The tide was shifting. At dawn, convoys of medical trucks rolled through the streets. Soldiers unloaded boxes of medicine, food, and supplies. Widows and children gathered at community centers where officials, now under watchful eyes, handed out support packages. Across the nation, hope stirred. And in the hospital where Amadou rested, nurses smiled as the news reached them. One whispered, "This night changed everything." For Ibrahim, it was not just reform. It was a promise carved into the heart of the nation. No one who sacrificed for their country would ever be forgotten again. 1 year later, the palace gates were no longer a place of despair for the widow. They were only a memory fading with each new sunrise. Amadou ran across the dusty courtyard of his new school. His laughter clear, his steps strong. The sickness that once nearly took his life was gone. His backpack bounced against his shoulders, stuffed with books instead of hunger. His mother watched from a distance, her eyes glistening. She no longer sat on the street begging for scraps. With government support and a small job at a community center, she stood tall, dressed in clean clothes, her dignity restored. The memory of that night never left her the moment a stranger, a leader, had carried her son when the world had turned its back. That act had changed not only her life, but her view of what leadership could mean. One quiet afternoon, without cameras, without crowds, Ibrahim returned. He walked into the schoolyard in simple clothes, no convoy, no fanfare. The children rushed to greet him, but his eyes searched for only one face. Amadou spotted him and ran forward, clutching a notebook. Inside were sketches of houses, roads, and machines. His small voice beamed with pride. "Excellency, I want to build things like my father defended things." "Will you look?" Ibrahim knelt, flipping through the pages with a faint smile. His voice was soft, but carried weight. "Your father gave his life for this nation. Now you must live for its future. These dreams you carry, protect them because they will protect all of us." The widow stepped closer, her voice breaking. "I never thought we would see this day. You gave us more than survival. You gave us back hope." Ibrahim shook his head gently. "You gave me something greater, the reminder that no leader can stand tall while his people kneel." As the afternoon sun dipped low, the children gathered around, their laughter echoing against the school walls. The widow held her son, her heart full. For the first time in years, she did not feel forgotten. Hope had not only returned, it had taken root. And in the quiet corners of a once broken family, a new future was beginning to bloom. The sun dipped low over Ouagadougou, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Outside the schoolyard, Ibrahim stood quietly watching Amadou chase his friends, his laughter ringing clear. Beside him, the widow wiped her eyes, no longer a beggar, but a mother with dignity restored. As the evening breeze lifted the flag above the school, Ibrahim's voice was steady, almost like a vow. Compassion is not weakness. It is the true strength of a nation. The crowd that had gathered clapped softly, their hearts full. For them, this was more than one story. It was proof that kindness could still change lives. If this story touched your heart, comment 1 below. If not, comment 0. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of hope and humanity.